Welcome. I am Sandja Brügmann, and this is New Global Mind, where we explore leadership for systems transformation. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest, Erik Korsvik Østergaard. He is a futures thinker, leadership advisor, speaker, and author of 3 books on progressive leadership and organizational design, the most current being Anticipatory Leadership. He's the founder of Good Morning April, a boutique consulting agency. Erik, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really look forward to where this conversation is going to take us.
I've followed your work for many years and I'm a big fan. One of the things that stands out to me about your work is you come from an engineering and mathematics background and you have the capability to speak a concise and concrete language. You are able to take complex, intuitive, and sensing mechanisms and apply them into that structure of business and organization.
Well, that's really something that I strive to do. I strive to put myself in the seat of the people that I work with, being top leaders in a life science company or middle manager in an engineering company, and then say, okay, but the complex things that we work with when we work with anticipatory leadership or future thinking or foresight or new ways of working, how do we make that tangible for the people that we're working with?
You're one of the people that actually are able to convey this new emerging paradigm, as we could call it, into the current paradigm. And if we want to create systems transformation, that's what we need to do. We need to work with people within the current systems mindset and upskill, but also help them see different type of brighter futures.
I really like taking the shoulders of somebody and then pointing, maybe we should investigate what goes on here. Let's go on a little mental journey and experience or play around with new ideas. I get inspired by so many people on the global scale that that feeds those ideas into me. So I'm a sponge for inspiration, reading books and watching YouTubes and following subreddits and all of that, just emerging ideas and thoughts and then conveying them further. That's really something that I find interesting.
So you are practicing what you teach. What do you call that?
I think we could call that horizon scanning. You can imagine you place yourself on a chair or on a step ladder and you just crawl up and you start to scan and you start to look at what is going on in the horizon. What kind of new movements are coming? What kind of anecdotes are you listening to? What kind of signals are you sensing? That skill of sensing is really something that we try to build as a capability in the organizations. What are you listening for? What odd things are going on in your organization? What odd things, what anomalies are happening in your ecosystem? Things that might just be a bleep and never happen again, or things that could snowball into something that will end up being a trend and affecting you in your leadership or in your business model. So that kind of horizon scanning is a central part of what I do.
So what I hear you say is you listen for anomalies. Is that one of the tips?
Yeah. Listening for when you scroll through LinkedIn or when you look at the news or when you look at the subreddits of futurology, look at the things that make you go, that was odd. Or inside organizations, look for conversations where you stumble upon strange words or strange decision-making ways or new software that's being installed, things that are odd, that might be revealing an underlying driver for new things that you either want to nurture because they're good, or you want to investigate them, or maybe you want to suppress them because they are pulling energy out of the organization. But that kind of listening skill where you stop and say, that was interesting. Why did you say that? And why did you choose that? Could you unfold that? And have you seen that in other places? It's really interesting to do that.
How do you know? And now I'm obviously diving into one of the concrete processes and we'll zoom out a little bit in a bit as well. How can someone know whether they should nurture it, continue observing it before they do anything, or suppress it? What are some of those mechanisms?
One of the classical things when you have a signal, let's just say we have a signal of people wanting a flatter hierarchy. Let's just take that as
As an example.
As an example. Then you literally, you make a small workshop, and it only takes 20 minutes. You place a little sticker with that on the middle of the table. And you say, we will have a flatter hierarchy. And then you sit around that table, and then you have a little workshop. It takes 20 minutes, and you have first order consequences. And you do that in silence. You write down maybe 4 people sitting around the table. What would be the first order consequences of a flatter hierarchy? New roles, new ways of making decisions, and blah, blah, blah. And you place that. And then you discuss. And then you have the second order consequences in the same way. In order to understand the effect of a signal or a trend, you investigate it. You immerse in it. You play around with it. You let it unfold until you have some kind of emotional reaction to it. Either you say, wow, this is interesting. We need to make a lab on a broader scale. Or we say, okay, this is actually not interesting. Actually, we hate it because it's disruptive to the culture, to the business model, to the governance inside. So now we have played around with it, and we have emotional reactions to it. And those we can use to understand whether we should nurture it, investigate it, explore it, or leave it alone and say, okay, that was not something. So we need to play around with it until we get the emotional reactions.
So until there's some kind of emotional reaction. So that also sounds like there's an emerging skill then within leadership and organization, emotional literacy, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. EQ, emotional quotient, is something that we all have it. We practice it when we are with our families, when we play football, when we go around in traffic. We have it with us. It's maybe not that common to pull it out in a business setting. And that's maybe some of the tricks that where we lead each other into actually talking about emotional reactions to trends and to options and to futures and to strategic choices. Not only the rational, what are we investing money in, but also what are we investing our time and attention in? And that is a thing, it's a skill that we have, but making it legit to talk about may be a new thing.
How are people responding to you when you come with that type of, and now we're going to do something a little unusual within this context? Are you able to get people along?
Yeah.
Seeing?
First of all, I don't call it unusual. I don't frame it as something new. I just say, okay, so what's your reaction to this? I just take it for granted that people have a reaction. I just ask them if they, well, normally when I ask people, what do you feel about this? They have this blank stare. So instead of just having a blank and open-ended question about how do you feel, I maybe give them like 6 words. Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel enthusiastic? Do you feel sad? So I give them a limited number of feelings to react to, and then a number of core emotions and a number of sub-emotions for each of them. So I have this emotional tree that is, I think it consists of something like 42 emotions in 6 categories. That really helps people to, okay, I feel that, and that's the sub-emotion. And then we can make a heat map amongst all the leadership people and say, well, some of you feel this is dreadful. Some of you feel hopeful. Some of you feel ambitious. So we have a split feeling towards this. That discussion itself, just to map it out, makes it easier for people. By doing that, it doesn't feel unusual. It's just something that we do. So how do you feel about this? That's the way that I do. But people find it odd from time to time to start imagining what might happen because they are used to sense making. They are not used to sensing. They're used to having that rational, we have a problem, solve the problem. And instead we go in and we emerge, we explore new things that does not exist yet. And that's part of the future's literacy, to be able to imagine and tell stories about things that do not exist and to vocalize your assumptions or your anticipations about things that do not exist yet. That's really interesting, to dive into the future's literacy. And we do that. We sneak people into that skill by some of the futures thinking workshops. So futures thinking, it's a bunch of tools and by which we train people in futures literacy. So it comes out as a side effect.
So you're saying that people are used to sense making. Sense
Yes.
making is more commonplace, but primarily what you see is that they do that from a rational perspective, and you're
Totally.
trying to take them into some deeper layers with sensing.
Yes, absolutely. People are, myself, I'm an engineer. I'm educated in problem solving. I'm educated in taking a number of data, a number of tools, a number of solutions and methodologies, putting them together, gaffer tape, WD-40, and we have a solution. That's what we're educated in. That's what people from business college is educated in, from the universities. I'm being black and white here, you know that.
Of course,
So,
but it's gaffer tape saves everything.
Yeah, gaffer tape and Excel. It ties an organization together. So what we also do, what we do when we do strategies is also that we say, okay, primarily we look backwards and say what has happened over the past years. We take a ruler and then we calculate forwards. We look at where we are and then we look in the past and we calculate forwards. And what we're trying to do with strategic foresight is actually to say, okay, let's for a day just forget where we are and look at what's affecting us instead. Where might we end with these trends, with these drivers affecting us? Can we imagine what that will be? Can we imagine those futures for the organization? Imagine how we make decisions in 10 years when we are maybe 100 times more people than we are today, or when we are 100 times less people than we are today, when the market is changing that. So we are trying to let people sense what could happen in that, and not the sense-making part, but just sensing and emerging and imagining and telling stories and building the futures with Lego. You can see there's a lot of Lego in my background here, making people tell stories about how they think the future could emerge, how it could happen. And they're calculating backwards from that. And the calculating backwards part is where the sensing and the sense-making then interferes. When we have done that, we can then take the ruler again and we can make a plan for how we might go forward. But the sensing it's part of the workshops, it's part of what we do all the day. We all do it, we all have it. It's a matter of asking people to tell stories about what they sense and not focusing on the sense-making part.
I would love to sit in a room of traditional engineers and hear you run that workshop for the first time. I think because it's not, as you're saying, they're not schooled. I come from a different background. I come from psychology. So that comes a little more natural for that capability. But that first time when, going from a brain heavy way of making sense of the world to also using different modalities, having worked with leaders for a long time, also creating that safe space to be brave and to explore, allow that exploration, learning new skills. We always feel a little uncomfortable in that space.
Yeah. And that's maybe some of the skills that we are, first of all, unpacking and revealing and nurturing as we go along, like playfulness and possibilism and plasticity. Those 3 Ps, they are really vital when we go into these sessions. That kind of playfulness, I like literally building some of the future, like building the future for a hospital in Lego. Just having people in 3 hours building Lego, taking the inspiration from Lego serious play and all the psychology going on in that area. It's purely documented and well documented that it makes people get rid of some of their traditional ways of thinking and talking, and their symbolism changes when you use the brick as a metaphor for money or for risk or for whatever it is that you're working with. And it's an externalization. You can point to your process. You can point to money and stuff like that. It changes how we tell stories. And that playfulness is part of it. The second part is that kind of plasticity, where you say, okay, your idea, Sandja, was actually better than mine. Let's throw my idea away for just half an hour and use your idea for half an hour. I step into your shoes. I put on your glasses. I take your idea and we unfold it. Maybe we find out it's a crappy idea and mine was crappy too, but John's or Susanna's was better. So that kind of plasticity that we can throw away our own ideas and emerge in your ideas or your world is crucial. And that also points to the 3rd P, being a possibilist. not only a pessimist or an optimist, but seeing the options, seeing the possibilities and say, okay, there's a door, we can go through that. We can explore that for half a day or for just 15 minutes, or we can pull out ChatGPT and we can have a role play. We can feed all the trends and then there. We do that with some of the people that I work with. We use an LLM like Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity. We feed the data in and we role play. And then we say, make a new scenario where we, for example, start working more with the hospital in UK. What will that play out with? How will that give that kind of possibilism? So the playfulness and the possibilism and the plasticity are things that comes out and that we nurture through these workshops.
I hope you invite me along for one of them at some point. I would love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's just zoom out a little bit. The title of this session, Anticipatory Leadership and Futures Literacy. And your most recent book, Anticipatory Leadership, I'll give a link in the show notes so people can purchase it or take a look at it. What is anticipatory leadership?
It's that kind of leadership that uses anticipation in how they navigate their world. Anticipation is the idea that we try to study what we assume when we make decisions, what our assumptions are, what we anticipate will happen, or how people will react, or how the market will react, or what we will prefer in the future. So that kind of, we are assuming something. And we all have that skill. I could ask you, what are you going to have for dinner? That's an assumption about what's going to happen later today. What's going to happen at Christmas? What will happen in 10 years? So we all have that. So it's a leadership trait and leadership skill where we discuss what we assume when we make decisions, when we talk about strategic choices, when we invest time and money, attention in something, when we try to maybe not predict, but at least tell stories about what could unfold or how things could unfold with the futures and with the scenarios and with the organizational decisions that we are going to make. That is anticipatory leadership. And it's an augmentation. It's not a replacement of strategic or classical leadership. It's an augmentation. Well, the anticipatory leadership is also in the area of sensing. And they have to augment each other, the classical and the foresight. Foresight is part of anticipatory leadership. So it's an umbrella term for imagining things that could happen so that we can make decisions today. And that's called using the future.
Using the future. There's also, it sounds a little bit like a model we use that's called backcasting.
Backcasting is part of it. Future casting is creating scenarios. So future casting is making either possible or plausible futures, maybe even preferable futures. You got 3 Ps, stealing them from Joseph Voros. He coined those. Future casting is creating scenarios in a future, a distant future. That can be 2 years or 10 years or 50 years, depending on your business model. That's future casting. And then you explore them and you create emotional reactions to them. When you have done that, then you backcast to get there. What needs to be in place? What do we need to invest in? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? And plan from the future, strategizing from the future, designing your organization from the future, making the plan from the future, not from today, but making it from the future. That is a big mental jump to calculate backwards. Just imagine, this is concrete example for things that we do. We have a whole day where we explore such a future. Let's say the future of this IT company in 10 years. And we have a whole wall that's built with images, and we have taken photos out, and we have printed out from Unsplash, and we have made scenarios with Perplexity and whatnot. And then we have that wall, and we imagine, it could look like that. And then we literally take 3 steps backward. 1, 2, 3, all of us. We have a small table with a number of post-its. What needs to be in place 2 years before that future? And then we write that down. And then we take 3 steps back again. 1, 2, 3. So we embody that kind of, we calculate backwards. And then we have a table with more post-its. And that kind of walking physically backwards is that kind of, it's a mental image that becomes a physical image of time travel. That's the way I have tried doing backcasting.
you're using spatial awareness in a very concrete way within the process, because of course the brain does, rather than sitting down at a table and then saying in your mind, well, let's now zoom out 2 years, what do we need to do, what needs to be in place to create this scenario, actually moving the body. And also, I think the group dynamic, it does something that we can't necessarily rationally understand. From a rational perspective, it seems a little silly. We're walking 2 steps back. But from an intuitive and sensing capability, we know that that works. It creates a different framework and mindset.
So it's the same idea as also working with the super athletes. You have won the marathon. What did you do the month before that? You have succeeded winning the Champions League in handball. What did you do the month before that? So that kind of imagination of you are there is the same trick, the same idea of visualizing and embodying and telling the emotional reactions to a state that you want to, a preferred state, a desired state.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Erik. I'm a Danish national archery champion in my youth, but from an early age, I learned visualization techniques. A competition is very taxing. It's 2 full days. You shoot a lot of arrows. It's not as physically hard as it is mentally. It's really a mental sport. So visualizing the perfect shot, from taking the breath before you pull the string of the bow and all the way to the arrow hitting that target perfectly. So I actually learned that when I was, I think, 12 or something like that. It's a fantastic skill to bring into the business setting.
Yeah, me too. And what I can see, this has an effect. The way that when we work with futures literacy, when we work with futures thinking processes, when we engage in anticipatory leadership and we imagine those futures, both the ones that we hate and the ones that we prefer, then there's some emotional reactions. There's some emotional impact coming out of that. And I have coined it with a 4-letter abbreviation, HOCA, the HOCA. When people have explored or told stories about those futures, imagine them. They have been in them. They had created artifacts. They have built Lego. Something happens. First of all, they become hopeful. They become hopeful about this is actually possible, that we can do this. Hope, ownership, confidence, and agency. They have hope. This is possible. Whatever kind of tough place that you're in right now, there's hope that this can change. And then because they have been there, they have designed it from the future, not from today, but they are using the future to design and strategize from the future. They start to own the solution because they are involved in it. And then they become confident. This is actually possible because we are part of making the plan, part of designing the approach, the governance, the decision making, the business model, the way we use AI, the way that we go to market, whatever it is. And that ends up in the last part, is that people become agents. They have agency. They actually believe that we can do something. It's not only overwhelming that the trends and the external world is forcing something, but we can actually act. So from these futures thinking processes and methodologies, whether it's 2 days or it's 3 months that I'm doing right now with a life science company, people get hopeful, they have ownership, they become confident, and they have agency. And those are the emotional impacts from these processes. And then, of course, we have all the functional impacts, road mapping and planning and investment scenarios. And so we have that as an asset. It's
the emotional aspect, zooming in on that a little bit, the autonomy, that also collective autonomy, really, because you're creating a shared scenario and direction, and ownership, confidence, and agency to act as a collective, but also individually. Are you creating any kind of structure in terms of governance to deploy this methodology, or how are you approaching that?
Yes, all the time. And it's always bespoke and it's always different based on the business model and based on who I'm working with and the industry and whatnot. But there's always some kind of design up to these processes, design in the processes and design afterwards. So it's a creative approach to it with the people that I work with because they need to be part of it. There's a golden nugget lying in how you facilitate and how you drive these processes in and what experience that you bring to the table. Okay, this will not bring you any further. Now we need to shift and we need to have as facilitators some kind of anchor points that we need to drive people through. Primarily, it's a co-created process with some frames. And within those frames, there's a lot of wiggle room based on who we're working with and how they approach the trends and what trends we have in the market and all sorts of things. It's a framework with some tools, but that middle layer is depending on who we are working with and how the group dynamics pan out through these days and weeks.
I think you're touching on a very interesting point of being a facilitator. It's about holding that space, knowing some of the guardrails, and still allowing the emergence. So there's some different capabilities you as a facilitator need to embody.
True. Yeah. The whole area of futures thinking and futures literacy has also grabbed the attention from academia. And one of the things that they have found in their studies of these processes is that facilitation is key to driving this forward. So there's two things as prerequisites. First of all, people need to be to some degree skilled and educated in futures thinking and futures literacy, what it is. They need to read the articles or see the videos or have some kind of training. It can be half an hour or 2 days or whatever, but they need to have the basic understanding in place. Secondly, facilitation is key to driving this forward, as you say. Somebody who has made a lot of mistakes, who has a lot of stories to tell about this might go wrong and this went wrong over here. Somebody that's trustworthy and is humble enough to say, okay, I also make mistakes. I'm also part of this as we go along. Somebody who's not stubborn, but again, back to the playfulness, the possibility, and the plasticity of listening to the room. And that is maybe also part of it, being able to listening to the group dynamics, the emotional shifts, where we need to slow down and stay, where we need to allow that we go into a rabbit hole because that might be useful for the conversation, when to pull us up from the rabbit hole, when to move forward. And that skill is needed.
Absolutely. And of course, it comes with experience.
Yeah.
The more experience, really, one thing is what you can read and learn in a course of competencies, but I think the facilitation is really about learned experience, wisdom, so to speak.
Many leaders do that naturally. Some need help or want to have an external facilitator, either from inside the organization or from somebody else. Somebody needs to have that role either in the workshop or in the processes. Somebody needs to be your guide in those areas.
In one of your articles, you mentioned awareness of your ecosystem is vital.
Mm-hmm.
Speak a little more to that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, how do we define the ecosystem that we work with? Because when you have the ecosystem, in principle, could be the whole universe, everything. So in a company, in an organization, in a leadership group, first of all, to understand what are your interfaces that you work with and what are the interfaces to the interfaces and what is the soft limits of the ecosystem that you work with? Can you draw it? Can you draw who you're working with? And then try to understand what is actually going on in those areas, like inside your organization, the other business unit. What are they doing? What are they thinking of us? What are they considering internal trends and movements that might affect them? How do we interact? How do we interface with them or interact with them? On the market level, what are our customers doing? What are our competitors doing? What are the suppliers doing? What are all the technology vendors doing? What are affecting them? That kind of removing your glasses and looking out towards what are other people doing, understanding the collaborational part of it when you do future thinking. It creates new lenses to understanding what you're doing, and then maybe invite them in creating some, maybe not in all of the workshops, let's spend a day with our customers. Let's spend a day with the other business units and say, how do you tackle your strategic or tactical planning right now where AI is just going kaboom? How do you do that? So listening to other people, involving them in your imagination processes is that's part of it.
So there's some practicing of empathy, really putting yourself in another person or another entity's shoes, understanding how is something affecting them and their work.
Yes, absolutely. Role playing, listening to other people's stories, taking a walk with them, like literally go and spend time with the people that you work with to understand what's on their mind, what are affecting them, how do they work with anticipation, how do they work with the future, how do they work with strategy, how do they work with foresight, what are their assumptions. And maybe that's one of the critical points that you can learn from doing that. What are they assuming? What are they assuming about you? Are they assuming, for example, things I hear that the leaders, they make decisions without talking to anybody, and say, that's an assumption. Have you actually talked to them? So that kind of pulling out assumptions from your ecosystem about you or assumption about how they navigate is a clear learning that you can do. It's also Otto Scharmer and going down to that theory, you listening and sensing, so that we can make better decisions, understand what we assume when we do stuff.
And I'm hearing that this is also about stepping into the relational space, because in order to have those type of conversations, it does require some relational intelligence and also an openness to ask some questions that we might not usually ask of each other, and on both sides, and being willing to let go of any kind of limiting assumptions or expectations that we place on ourselves and others.
Yeah, very, very good point. Compassion and empathy and listening skills and being able to phrase your questions in a way where they're not confrontative, but they are opening up to conversations. That kind of actually listening to each other, being present and sensing. Now we are just closing the loop here. It's about sensing what goes on and also revealing in the conversations that I've learned that in the conversation that you have, you also start sensing something about yourself. What are you actually asking? And where does that question come from? Is that revealing something in your own culture, in your own list of assumptions, in your biases, in your beliefs, in your myths, in your narratives that you're telling yourself about your organization and your culture and your decision-making processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, of course, a mirror to who we are ourselves, so, and that's also how we can become more conscious, more self-aware and other aware, is in that relational space.
Gradually happens when you keep doing this in your leadership team, when you start to weave it into your either weekly or monthly practice, then from that kind of foresight thinking and listening and sensing, you grow into actually being more futures literate. And that it grows also from only being focused on strategic foresight or strategic decision making into being something that is more natural, where you actually start looking at what goes on the global scale, what goes on the planet, what goes on in nature, what goes on with the people that you're around in your communities. It becomes more of, instead of only being applied in organizations as a strategic tool, it becomes a thing where you start looking at the world and life differently. That's truly fascinating.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What I'm hearing you say, now I'm doing deep listening, and you can reflect back to me if I'm on the right track here. What I'm hearing you say is that these ways of working also help people become more authentic and more whole.
I haven't thought about that. That's a good point. Authenticity might emerge. That's a good point. Because you get to that whole idea of imagining something in a distant space and time, and how that then informs your reactions today. That point when you go from imagination to, so how do I change right now? How do I use that emotional reaction, that imagination to make decisions today? Maybe that will in part enable you to be more authentic, as you say. I think it's a good point.
I think if we have to use what I'm, futures thinking and the way you're working with imagination and sensing, and what you're doing is really pulling out more of the human capabilities. We have many different intelligences, but more traditionally in business or in leadership, we have valued the more rational thinking intellect. And now we're opening up more capabilities in order to be able to actually become an anticipatory leader or develop that futures literacy sense. So that is that part of becoming a more authentic whole person in order to actually become futures literate. So though it's a byproduct, I think that's also very valuable.
Absolutely. And it is a byproduct of these processes. And maybe you can consider it the primary product. You have the means of the processes and what you do in order to actually become more futures literate, in order not to only apply it at work, but also apply it when you are with your families, when you are in your community, when you're out in the garden. Whatever that you do, you can actually start sensing, start being futures literate, start being present and listening for not prediction, but listening for what is emerging, what is coming, what is growing inside you, around you, in your ecosystem, in your community. That kind of listening for emergence and anticipation for emergence is so giving. I'm not there yet. I'm practicing that skill. It's something that I continuously practice. And so sometimes I have these glimpses where I'm really good at it, and then the day after I'm shitty at it. It's really interesting what kind of roller coaster it is when you work with that.
It's a learning process. And
Totally.
sometimes we get that hit of, whoa, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly how to show up and contribute. And then an hour later, it's like, it's gone, and that's also wonderful that we can have these open conversations. And I see that more and more also among colleagues in a business setting, and it creates trust. This is a normal part of being human. We are not perfect. We don't get it perfect all the time. And it brings humility into the picture. Some call it brave space, that whole human's presence. If we get to the point in a team or collaboration where we know each other and trust each other, for example, if I'm off my game or there's some project where I'm not entirely certain how to approach this, I can say that. And then you or someone else on the team won't shame me or make me wrong or like I'm not good enough. It's like, oh, well, I felt that way yesterday, so now I'll take over, so that we operate as a collective. And I think that's really also a strength when teams can operate at that level.
Sensing what is in you and being able to vocalize it, sensing what goes on in the team, what goes on between people, sensing what goes on inside other people, and being able to call it out and vocalize it. I think that's great. And it brings the group together. It's part of understanding, again, back to the anticipatory assumptions. What am I assuming about you right now? What are you assuming about me? What are we assuming about the audience that are listening in? What are we assuming? And can we bring those up? We also can we actually change our assumptions? Can we change our anticipation? Can we bring, again, back to the hope? Can we bring ownership and confidence? Can we, most of all, bring agency? Can we do stuff about where we are and where we're going so that we can change it to the futures that we would prefer?
Erik, I think with those potent words, this is a wonderful place to conclude our session. Thank you so much for sharing some of your potent work and your insights.
Thank you for the conversation, taking us places where I also learned. I love that. So thank you.
You're so welcome. I'm Sandja Brügmann. You've been listening to New Global Mind, Leadership for Systems Transformation. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and most of your podcast channels, as well as our website, thepassioninstitute.com. See you next time.